This is the last module of this phase of my layout, and this has been a 1.5 year journey to get to this point, and I'm excited to get on the next phase of the journey of this layout. But it's kind of like closing a book on a part, because this has been my entire focus for the past 18 months, even longer. So let's get into the final module.
This video is brought to you by Model Railroad Academy.
For this module, we're going to be doing the more industrial side of downtown Elkin. There's a steel fabrication facility that builds like steel buildings, carports, things like that. So they get a lot of rolled steel. So you're going to see some coil steel cars and things like that, as well as other things that bring in different products. So that's what we're going to be building here. So let's get right into it.
This is the module that we're going to be working on. It is a T-track double module, and it's going to have a steel fabrication industry that builds metal buildings. So you're going to be getting a lot of steel coil cars as well as various cars for the different product. We're also going to be storing some locomotives for local switching here as well, which is why there are 2 sidings. So let's go ahead and get started with the build. The first thing that we need to do is we need to get this area that's going to mesh with my thunderstorm module. So we need to build a hillside. Now I'm not going to have the hillside be quite as big, but we're going to do this with a little bit of extruded foam. And this is about the simplest hill that you can build. I just have a scrap sheet that I've used for holes for trees. I'm just going to draw the exact shape that I need, and I'm cutting a single layer of foam. This is very simple and should work out just fine. Next up, we're going to use some hot glue to attach this, so just kind of getting it everywhere it is needed. This usually works really great for me, and then we're just going to tuck it right in place right there. Now, one quick thing that I needed to do before I really get into this is I needed to fix up some wiring. I had some wires become disconnected, so I went ahead and fixed these before I really got going into scenicing this module. This is a really big benefit to the modular setup. I didn't have to crawl under any tables or anything like that. I just unclicked the module and did the work. Now I'm using a sheet of styrene that's going to be doing the parking lot work here, and I just need to make sure that it fits just fine. And then I'm also going to grab the building that I'm going to place. This is that warehouse that I have used on 2 layouts now, and then I go ahead and take everything off and get everything painted that uniform brown. Now if you're not comfortable with painting around the track, you can always tape it off and you can remove the backdrop, but I was pretty comfortable doing this, so I just went to town. I did need to paint my styrene to look like asphalt, and the way that I do that typically is I actually give it a base coat of gray, and I make that like a nice even coat, and then I come back with a can of black spray paint, matte black spray paint, and I kind of do it unevenly so that it looks a little worn and weathered, but it gets those darker tones that asphalt has. So it's just a matter of looking until you feel like you got it just right, but that's how I typically do it. Now it's time to glue that parking lot in place before we do any more scenery work, and I'm just using some white glue. In this case I got Mod Podge Matte Medium, and I'm just going to spread it around underneath where the parking lot is going to go. So I use a brush, do that, and then I'm just going to place the parking lot on top of it. I didn't really need to weigh this down. I was kind of surprised. It just kind of stuck there once I was good to go, and let that dry.
Now, if you're looking to not only broaden your skills, but just look into more things that are model railroading related that you may not have thought of, you should check out our sponsor today, Model Railroad Academy.
Model Railroad Academy is your online resource for model railroad instructions, ideas, and information, with loads of tutorials and articles for model railroaders of every skill level.
One of my favorite videos that I've watched recently is making your own homemade ballast, and it's just a really cool tutorial that shows you how to make custom ballast in case you're doing a prototype that doesn't have a commercially available ballast. Plus you can find tutorials on everything from bench work to electronics to scenery, all sorts of things there. The first 1,000 people to sign up at the link in the description below will get a full year of premium membership to Model Railroad Academy for $1.49. Offer is valid for new members only. Now, if you've ever seen my ballast process for Cotter unit track, it's fairly simple and straightforward. The way that I do this is I always start off with a line of white glue along the base of the road bed. I make sure not to get it on the ties or anything. I don't want anything sticking on top of the ties or on the rails or anything like that. And I'm just going to ballast the sides. I don't ballast the middle. I sometimes will do that if I'm working on a smaller space, but that's extremely tedious. But the weathering will usually take care of it that I do later. So I spread along and get the nice line, and then I use the cap from my Woodland Scenics fine ballast in a medium gray, and I just sprinkle it along the edge right there, and then I use another brush just kind of shape it and get it the exact way that I want it. In this case, I needed to add a gravel area in between the sidings right here, so I did that as well. And then I just glue it down. I start by soaking it with some 90% IPA, that's isopropyl alcohol, and I just mist that over. And then I use a mixture of about 35 to 30% white glue and water with the rest of it, with a little bit of dish soap in it, and that's just lets it soak in really, really well and gets a nice hard crust, and then I just let that dry. Now, once that was done, I used some of the dust and the weathering powder that comes with the Woodland Scenics gravel that I used, and I used it to weather up the tracks just a little bit, make them a little bit more dusty and less kept up. Now, if you've ever seen me do this before, we're doing our scenic base right here, and I'm doing it along the front because I gotta do a little bit more work in the back, but we're gonna start in the front right here. And what I do is I start off by putting that glue down to hold that down, then I use Woodland Scenics Earth Blend to give me a nice base. And once that is done, I can then sprinkle some blended turf in the green colors to make a good little brown-green mixture, because like I've said many times before, nature isn't a uniform color. It's a mix of browns and greens and all sorts of different colors. So that's really what you want to do there. Then once that is done, I can come back with some coarse turf, and that's going to give us some weeds and stuff and that kind of growth, and it's going to look more natural. And once that is done, I soak it with the IPA and my scenic glue mixture. Now we're going to work on the hillside, and what we have to do with the hillside is we have to completely cover the fact up that I just put a piece of foam right there. So we're going to completely cover this in vegetation. Now the way we start that is we put white glue all over this area because we're going to need to put a scenic base on it as well. So the exact same process as that little front strip we just did. Now in the area next to the tracks, we're going to go ahead and use our Woodland Scenics gravel. That is because that's going to be like a work area where different vehicles are driving to and from the tracks and right around that area. So we really need that to be more gravel and something that's used for the purposes of the steel fabrication plant. Then we're going to use a little bit more gravel along the back edge here just to give this a nice little edge where we have the difference between the pavement and the dirt. Now we need to cover up that really abrupt cliff face basically right there. We're going to start by just throwing a little bit of coarse turf out of what I have left in a bag. I just did that for reasons. But the thing we're going to use here to cover this up is clump foliage, and we're using kind of a medium green color. This particular one's from JTT Scenery. Woodland Scenics makes plenty of this as well. And we're going to take this and we're just going to stick it along with that glue right there and completely fill up that little cliff face right there so that it is not visible at all. And this is the beginning of building up to where we have a completely vegetation covered hillside, at least by appearances. Next, we're going to take some Woodland Scenics fine leaf foliage. This is very similar to Super Trees, except it comes pre-made, and we're going to stick it along the edges back there. You can break this up, and you can stick it just about anywhere. It's really good for making trees that are like coming out of vegetation, like I'm doing right here. It's also good just for doing all sorts of trees in general. So this is really good for deciduous, anything like that that you find in the southern United States. So we're just going to kind of fill this area with different heights of this fine leaf foliage. Now it's time to put in the tree canopy, and for this I'm using Woodland Scenics Forest Canopy. This is basically sedum stems that you put coarse turf all over, and I have a little box that I keep everything in because a lot of times I don't use the entire box that it comes in. Sometimes I do, but I like to be able to keep and use the supplies as I need them. So I'm using a box that I've already opened, and I've got a lot of the materials that I've kept and collected. So we're basically just going to make a bunch of these and just stick them right in the ground while the glue is still wet, and we're going to fill in a nice canopy. Now the way that I like to do this is I like to do the bigger ones to the smaller ones, but I also like to have one, maybe two, that really kind of protrude out a little bit. So when you're doing this, just kind of try to fill it in, but also make sure you have a few little prominent trees so that it looks a little bit more realistic and it's not just a uniform canopy. Once you've got all this done, you can soak this entire area in your IPA and white glue water mixture. And then while that is drying, I actually like to sprinkle coarse turf over it just to kind of really give it that unkept look. This isn't a perfectly mowed and manicured area. This is the area behind an industrial facility that they don't really use and they don't really care about. So we're going to go ahead and fill that in as much as possible with some coarse turf to where it still looks good though. Well, once that is done, we can do the same thing and soak the coarse turf with that IPA and glue mixture. Next up, we need to put an extension of the road. So what I did was the road that I built on the previous module, I'll link that at the end of this video, I made a little extension in Tinkercad and 3D printed it out. Then once I had it, I went ahead and put some tacky glue on it, just like the previous sections, and I glued it in place. Now this is a bit of an overhang that goes on to the next module, but this is not a T-track layout that's designed to go a ton of places, so I'm not too worried about it. But we do that, and then we can put gravel on it right up to the edge, and we can start to blend it into the scenery, which basically is just work it till you think it looks right. That's basically what I do. And then towards the end of that, I'm going to start mixing in some earth blends and some blended green textures for the fine foam that I'm using, and that's going to really start to blend it in really nicely. And then finally, I'm going to put in some coarse turf and things like that. That's also going to hide the seam in the module, and it will make it look like it's a bunch of overgrowth. And once I have all of that done, I can soak the entire thing in isopropyl alcohol and then my scenic glue mixture, and then we're getting pretty close on this module. It's starting to look pretty good. Now on to one of the last things that I do, but is also one of the most effective in making this look real, and that's weathering. I've got my weathering powders right here. I have a metal black, a rust color, and a silver color, and what I use here is I put typically the black in the middle of the track, and I also use it to dirty up the sides, but really where all the dust, dirt, and grime falls from the locomotives, right there in the middle, and I'll use the rust color on the sides of the ties and just give it a mix of dirt and things like that. Now the interesting thing here is going to come up when I use the silver here in just a second on the roads. Now when I do the roads, I take the black and I do it in the direction that cars would travel, so it just looks like stuff that's fallen off the car. And then I'm going to weather it and blend it into the side right here. And then I'm going to use the silver to kind of do tire streaks and driving streaks all over the asphalt and just make it look a little bit more realistic.
All right, and here is the completed base level of this module. I say base level because I'll talk a little bit more about that after this. So I have completed the base level of scenery on this layout. It is good to go, it is running. Most people probably actually consider this probably complete, but I've got a lot more that I want to do. I don't consider phase 2 done. Still got a lot of work more to do before I completely unveil phase 2, which includes a lot of detailing. Now I've saved all of the detailing on this layout for one big video that's going to be coming up fairly soon. I just have to collect all the parts and be able to do it in one swoop. So be on the lookout for that. Plus I've got a few other things that I got to do, but the unveil of phase 2 plus the beginning of phase 3 is in the pipeline. So be ready for that. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.